American Spectator. And joining me today is George Neumayr, a senior writer and editor here at the American Spectator, and he is the author of his new book called The Biden Deception. So for the next hour, The Biden Deception, there it is. Go out and buy it. We'll have links to the book in the tape that follows, and you can go straight there and buy it on Amazon or wherever your favorite bookstore is. But George, so welcome, George. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the impression of Biden, Joe Biden, the man, the myth, the legend, running against Trump, is that he is just the nice, amiable old man who will bring America back to a sense of normalcy and be the steady hand at the tiller. But that's not really true to anyone who's followed him. He's really quite radical. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Right. That's the fundamental idea of the book, is that the Biden deception is that he presents himself as a harmless moderate, but in fact, he's a radical in moderate's disguise. He's not moderate in his views, and he's not moderate in his demeanor. He's a rather irascible and intemperate character, actually. But in most of the book is devoted to exposing the radicalism of his positions. And I lay out on issue after issue that he has adopted the far left positions of the Democratic Party. And that's exactly how he's going to govern. He's not going to be less liberal than Obama. He's going to be more liberal than Obama. Obama has basically said that already, that Joe Biden is going to be the most liberal president ever. So he's really going to pick up where Obama left off and then push even farther to the left with his policies and with his personnel choices. Through Biden, we're going to get a raft of radicals in the administration and throughout the federal agencies. He's going to bring in the Bernie Sanders crowd and the AOC crowd. And those, as we know, personnel is policy. And so I'm anticipating that a Biden administration will be even more of a disaster than the Obama years were.
Well, and he really has to. One of the things that's changed is because the left felt that Obama didn't go far enough, which is just crazy to me, is that the people who have been elected into Congress especially have been increasingly radical, and they're not going to allow, and they seem to be running the show right now, they're not going to allow a Biden presidency to be like an Obama presidency. And Biden, issue by issue, has pushed left over and over again. Some of them, you have whole chapter titles on those different policy positions. He's pushed left on, like, the Green New Deal, for example. I don't know if all of you who are watching this video right now have, because I wrote about it and George has written about it, the radical position paper put together by Bernie Sanders and their working group that Joe Biden has adopted, and you can find it on Biden's website. But it's like a, radical document that is something that I don't think we've ever seen before in America, for sure. And you go through these various issues topic by topic in your book and really lay them out, starting with, let's just start where you start, which is going back and undoing tax cuts and raising taxes. I mean, the one thing that I think should scare every American, like right out of the chute, is their taxes will go up immediately in the middle of a COVID pandemic where some people are barely living and scraping by.
That's right. Yeah, he has said, Biden has said on multiple occasions that the very first thing he does as president is to eliminate the Trump tax cut. Mm-hmm. And he's going to raise taxes by $4 trillion. And that will be a huge weight on the economy. And it will, be the last thing that people need after this horrible year. is to see their taxes go up. And the middle class, Biden keeps saying, "Oh, I'm not going to tax the middle class."
Right.
But the Trump tax cut, if he wants to truly eliminate it, he's going to have to raise taxes on the middle class because they were the primary beneficiaries of the Trump tax cut.
Yeah. Well, yes, they were, and people don't really want to talk about it or think about it, but Obamacare was the largest middle class tax hike in history. And of course, Obama lied about it, and Biden was part of that lie. He was in that administration. He participated in it, and was one of the key factors in the Obama policy, because Obama is many things, but ambitious he is not. He's kind of lazy. And so the people around him really were pushing forth this kind of a tax increase, and Biden will do it again. I had no idea. Your book shocked me. I had no idea that as part of his policy that no one would be deported for the first 100 days.
Right. Yeah. He wants to basically turn America into a sanctuary country, and he's going to open up the borders. He'll probably try to tear down Trump's wall. He's going to extend amnesty to millions and millions of illegal immigrants, and he's going to support all of the policies of the Democratic mayors across the country who've turned their cities into sanctuary cities. So he's basically a La Raza style amnesty advocate, and under his administration, all of those that lobby, the amnesty lobby, is going to come into his administration, and they will have a lot of power and will dictate a lot of policies.
One thing that we're not even talking about, we talk about the Biden administration, but I really feel like this is the Kamala Harris administration and not the Biden administration, because Biden very clearly is not in possession of his faculties, not in a major way. He has his moments of lucidity, but he's slow. It's this, even the little bit of a campaign that he's doing, if you can even call it that. I'm struggling for the word to even, because he's not really campaigning. He's having a difficult time keeping up with. He's on teleprompters. He's using teleprompters to answer questions. The media's playing along, giving him the questions. I've seen on Twitter that he's got some military guy, intelligence guy said that he has special wireless earphones that are flesh-colored ear things inside his ear where somebody's feeding him the answers of what to say. And you can kind of see him say, him pause and wait for things to catch up. It's like, it's crazy. This is, and Kamala, did you see the video where she basically said in the Harris-Biden presidency, which is like, it didn't even seem like a Freudian slip. It sounded planned.
Right.
Certainly from her, I joked after that. I was like, Biden better be, have a food taster. But maybe it's even more overt than that. Maybe they have an agreement. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
I think that's a good theory. It would not surprise me in the slightest if he hands the presidency off to her after a year or two. That could very well happen. I'm wondering if he can even make it to the election day, let alone a year or 2 years into his presidency.
Harris-Biden administration is going to relaunch that effort and keep pushing further to make it.
Even Biden said it. So Kamala Harris said it. The next day, Biden said the Harris-Biden administration. They've both said it. It seems purposeful to me. Right.
And who knows, there might even be some Democratic aides who are telling Biden that out of a rejection of male privilege, he should put Harris's name first on the ticket. They're not beyond such crazy notions. And
I hadn't thought of that, but I guess that is possible, right? That they are doing that out of deference to, so that it's not a white man out front. But the interesting thing is they've been kind of keeping Kamala hidden in a box no one really likes her. And every time she opens her mouth, she says something annoying and problematic. As bad as Biden is with his gaffes, she's terrible, and no one likes her. I couldn't believe really that they picked her for the Veep, because she's so radical and so dislikable. Like, it's just the only people I saw who liked her were the DC type people, you know, right and left, who kind of like, she's got that kind of educated nastiness like Obama had, where he's speaking above you, and the elites like it because it's really nasty towards the average person. And right. And then they think, well, the average Joe, the average person doesn't understand that they're being made fun of. That's the way she speaks and acts. And so she's, you know, it rings hollow, but
yeah, she's a former prosecutor, and she has the manners of a prosecutor. Yeah. She no longer has the politics of a prosecutor. You know, she now has the politics of an ACLU activist.
Right.
But those sort of nasty prosecutorial manners have survived her political career. And yeah, she doesn't wear well. She's in terms of personality, she's off-putting, and then in terms of her politics, she's even more radical than Biden is. She's in favor of springing rioters from jail. You know, she sent out that infamous tweet in which she asked people to bail out rioters from jail. And
well, she's been bailing. She's had actively until this week on her website a link to donating to spring rioters out.
Yeah.
You know, Kamala Harris herself has been springing criminals from jail who've been burning towns and doing everything. It's almost unfathomably evil. She's all for burning down the businesses and lives of people who she would have to represent.
Right.
It's just crazy.
Right.
And with Biden being so addled and older and seemingly, you know, declining, her character and what she's doing right now seems to have a huge bearing on all of this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think her positions really represent what the Biden administration will push more than even what he stands for, because I think the personnel of a Biden-Harris administration will be largely made up of AOC types and Bernie Sanders types, and then retreads, radical retreads from the Obama years, like Eric Holder and Susan Rice and those folks.
Well, so that leads to another question tangentially, and then we'll come back to the book. But we've got the Supreme Court thing coming up here. Trump just announced that he would tell everybody at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday who his nominee is. And Kamala Harris is on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And she was hideous to Brett Kavanaugh, like shameful. I was so upset watching it. Like I was watching her just run this man through the mud, and just she was shameless. And I'm just wondering, do you think that her really bad behavior, that she will act the same way to the next Trump nominee?
Oh yeah, I think she'll grandstand as much as possible, and will subject that nominee to an ideological grilling akin to what Joe Biden did to Robert Bork. You know, people should keep in mind that Biden is the father of Borking. He was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee who presided over that infamous Robert Bork hearing, which really set in motion the kind of nasty blood battles that Supreme Court nominations have become ever since. And so Biden really, he laid the groundwork for that by being so nasty towards Robert Bork and he turned that hearing into an ideological litmus test of Bork, and he shifted the hearing away from any discussion of jurisprudence and towards just pure politics. And he borrowing a page from Teddy Kennedy, he portrayed Bork as a kind of wild-eyed Puritan who was going to knock down bedroom doors and
Right.
and reinstitute segregation and so forth. And it was a gross caricature of Bork's record. Bork had a record of originalism, which was a very well thought out position, and a position that didn't represent his personal political views. It simply represented his judicial philosophy. But Biden didn't let the discussion center on that. He pushed it in the direction of pure politics, and because the Democrats had the majority, they were able to get away with that first infamous Borking of a nominee. And really the poisonous consequence of that was that we ended up, our side, the Republican side, we ended up with a lot of weak nominees like Souter and Anthony Kennedy and John Roberts, because Republican presidents had been traumatized by that first Borking that Biden had orchestrated. And so we see with Ginsburg's passing, the left is already in that mode of they're ready to burn the country down if they don't get what they want. And that whole notion, I think, was that whole view of Supreme Court hearings was planted by Biden.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up Bork, and then of course, go ahead, Emil.
I time and again raised the gavel and said, "Are you certain, Judge, you've had enough time to respond to the questions?" And when it was all over, I said to Judge Bork, "Now, Judge Bork, do you think you got a fair hearing?" He said, "Yes." "Anything else you want to say, Judge Bork?" "No." "Anything at all you want to clarify?" "No."
Well, you can turn off that clip. He's a liar back then. He's a liar now. I mean, that's just baloney.
Yeah.
The hearing that really radicalized me and against Joe Biden was what happened to Clarence Thomas.
Right.
And how, again, it was just utterly shameful. I remember talking to Andrew Breitbart about it, because in Andrew Breitbart's history, he said he watched that, and that's when he changed from being a Democrat to a Republican. In that moment, he watched what the Democrats were doing to a really educated, intelligent Black man, and he couldn't abide it. And I think it's problematic even now. Whoever gets nominated is going to have to know that their lives could potentially be ruined.
Yeah.
And this was Joe Biden's doing. This is Joe Biden's legacy. This is Kamala Harris's now legacy. That's who these people are. And it's really and the thing is, they're also talking about bringing back norms. What norms are we discussing here? Because they're the ones who have broken these norms. And so this idea that Joe Biden is this nice guy is ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. He's as ruthless as they come in Washington, D.C. And the hearings, had the effect of basically turning judges into politicians. Yeah. And so they're now treated like politicians, who can be dragged through the mud over any, matter, no matter how demagogic it is. And that was really Biden's doing. He completely capitulated to the activists, the left-wing activists who wanted to turn hearings into blood sport. And, he could have stood up to them. But one of the circumstantial factors in his abysmal treatment of Bork was that came right on the heels of his plagiarism scandal, which ended his campaign in 1987. And so he was desperate to sort of vindicate himself and rehabilitate himself with the far left. Right. And so he used the Bork hearings to do that. And he was really preening and posturing for the sake of the activists in the party so that they would forget his plagiarism scandal.
Well, and let's talk about his plagiarism scandal for a second, because he didn't just plagiarize one little mistake or here or there, it was like a pattern with him.
Right.
So can you tell us all the ways that he plagiarized? And then maybe we can play a clip of one of the speeches that he plagiarized where it was word for word so much so. And it's so hardwired now, George, that I think he actually believes that this is his history. Some of the things that, well, he's lied about so many things. For example, how he met his wife, he's lied about. How his first wife was killed in a car accident. He lies and talks about a drunk driver. The guy wasn't a drunk driver. His wife was at fault.
Right.
And, it's terrible. I'm not saying that that's but he's lied so much about these things that they have become his truth, and it's not true. And so you see the ex-husband of Jill Biden saying, I'm sorry, but they started hooking up before we had a good marriage. And this guy is still sad, however many years later, that his marriage ended and it started with an affair. So all of this, he just makes it up and moves along. Okay, so back to his plagiarism.
Yeah, well, this has been a lifelong problem for Biden. It goes all the way back to at least his days in law school when he got caught ripping off an article from a law professor. He incorporated significant passages from a law article into one of his papers for one of his courses at Syracuse Law School, and he got caught. He got an F on the paper and was rebuked by the professor and was almost, I think the Syracuse administration was considering kicking him out. So that's the first recorded instance of plagiarism by Biden. But then in '87, he famously borrowed the words of Neil Kinnock, who it should be noted was a socialist. So it's very telling that the person whom he'd copy would be a socialist. Mm-hmm. And so he not only copied Kinnock's ideas, he even copied and ripped off Kinnock's biography and pretended like it was his biography. And after the media caught him out on that, they then started looking at other speeches he had given, and they found that he had been plagiarizing from Robert Kennedy, from Hubert Humphrey, at least, and I think some other folks. And so there was just sort of a trickle, sort of a constant trickle of instances of plagiarism after that first major one involving Kinnock, and so the backlash became so great over all that Biden had to he had to quit the race, and but then during his career in the Senate, he got he every once in a while he'd get caught out for telling whoppers. The most recent, or one of the more recent ones, was of course he said that he had been arrested when trying to visit Nelson Mandela in South Africa.
Right. That happened when? How long ago did that lie happen? I mean, he was telling that as recently as earlier this year, I think, or late last year. But he wasn't arrested. He was temporarily stopped by a policeman, and so it really has become a habit for Biden. He got. When his campaign put together their section on the environment, on the Green New Deal, it turns out that they ripped off some pages from an environmental group's website, and they got caught doing that. And so then they had to delete that from the page. One could argue that even, all the way up to right now, when Biden is basically saying all the same things that Trump is saying about COVID and what he's done on COVID, that's a form of plagiarism too. What has Biden proposed on COVID that hasn't already been done by Donald Trump? Well, right. And he's also lying about 200,000 people have died of COVID. That's not true. 200,000 people have died with COVID, but not from COVID. It's a technical thing, but it
Right.
makes a big difference. And then he lies about what his plan was at the beginning. He was calling Trump let's see, what are the words that he was using to describe Trump's racist policies against Chinese people and the whole, I mean,
Oh, xenophobic, yeah.
xenophobic, that's the word.
Yeah, I think one of the more shameful lies he's telling is the very fine people hoax.
Yes.
He launched his campaign with that lie that
Yeah.
Trump has called white supremacists very fine people. That has been debunked 1,000 times. Trump
Right.
was not referring to the white supremacists. In that same speech, he condemns white supremacists. He was obviously referring to the non-racist people who just didn't think the Lee statue should be torn down.
Well,
And he was also referring to the people who wanted the Lee statue turned down. So, but Biden has been just shameless in continuing that lie. I assume he'll continue that lie even in the debates. But it's a serious lie to call,
Yes.
sitting president a proponent of white supremacism.
Yes.
And it's going back to actually another really, I think, awful lie is the one you mentioned, the lie about the driver who got into the fatal accident with his wife. That guy did nothing wrong. He was not violating. There was an inquiry. There was an examination of the accident. He wasn't on alcohol. He wasn't drinking. He hadn't drunk any alcohol.
Yeah.
And he wasn't violating any traffic rules. And Biden's wife had basically gone through a stop sign and hit him. But
Yeah.
Biden was willing to go, for years, he was willing to tell people that his wife had been hit by a drunk driver. And according to that man's family, that lie really broke that guy. And his last remaining years on earth were very bitter as a consequence.
Well, yeah. I mean, can you imagine being defamed as basically essentially a murderer of a mother and a child?
Right.
And have to live with that for your whole life. And this guy has the power that Biden has.
Right.
And then ends up being vice president and continues to say that and talk and always the victim and making himself out to be the victim and everything else and smearing an innocent man, essentially.
Right.
This is not the character of a good man.
No.
And this is what we've seen over and over. Emo, can you show just the video of the plagiarism? I want our readers and our listeners to see this.
Today faces a controversy. 3 weeks ago at a debate at the Iowa State Fair, he used phrases identical to those delivered by British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock.
Little Connie Chung.
Kinnock's vision and life as his own.
Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why is Gladys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
My ancestors who worked in the coal mines in northeast Pennsylvania and come up after 12 hours and play football.
8 hours underground and then come up and play football.
It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
There was no platform upon which they could stand.
The notion that
Okay, I think that's enough, Amo. But I mean, so that gives us, I mean, that is just the thinnest, tiniest start of everything that he has lied about. He lied about, we didn't even talk about this. He lied about getting a full ride scholarship to law school, being the first guy in his family to go to college. Not true. Also not true. I mean.
Yeah, he said that he had placed high in his law school class when in fact he was at the very bottom. And I would say, he is a chronic liar. Even for a politician, he's an unusually habitual liar.
Yeah. So, as far as the character issue goes, it's one of the things that really drives me crazy about, especially the Never Trump crowd talking about Trump's character. Biden has made up his entire biography that he has not one original thought even now. It's part of the problem why he has such trouble keeping things straight, because he said so many lies. He doesn't even know what he said anymore.
Yeah.
And he's not a nice guy. One of the things I want to talk about before we get to some more substance on his particular policy positions, but is just how rude and impatient he's been with constituents when they've interacted with him, where he's just awful. Trump might be unkind to the media. Of course, they have it coming, in my opinion. But Biden is unkind and nasty to his own voters. And that's something that just doesn't really get covered, but has, I don't know. So like in one instance, the union worker where he just, got in his face. Yeah, here we have another clip.
Yeah. I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that. It's a viral video like the other ones you're putting out that they're saying they're lying. Oh, he disqualified it. Wait. Take your AR-14s and whatnot. This is not okay. Hold on. Hey, let's get moving. There's a lot of guys. On it. I'm not worried. Give me a break. Hey, there's a lot of guys.
Yeah, so the thing is, again, right in that, not only is he being really awful to this guy who's asking him a legit question about getting guns taken away, which is true, and you have a chapter on this, we can talk about it, but he's also lying that he didn't, and saying that he didn't say what he very obviously said, which is that he would get rid of guns.
Right.
So, I mean, okay, so let's see. You talk about, gun manufacturers. I'm going to take you on and I'm going to beat you. That is chapter, let's see, what chapter is that? That is chapter 5. And that was the little clip that we saw was Biden saying that he was not going to do exactly what he said he was going to do.
Right. And he's running with a candidate, Kamala Harris, who has advocated for quote unquote mandatory buybacks,
right?
Which is just a euphemism it's a Washington euphemism for gun confiscation. And he said, Biden's also said that he wants to make Beto O'Rourke his gun czar. He said Beto is going to solve my gun problem for me. Well, Beto O'Rourke has, made it explicitly clear that he's coming for people's guns. He said, I'm coming for your AR-15s. So, he's running on a platform of gun confiscation and gun restrictions. And he's also going to put on the courts, obviously, many, many opponents of the Second Amendment. And so that should worry people as well.
Yeah. Well, clearly that guy was worried, and clearly Biden didn't want to hear about it. I think the significance of that clip is not only his boorish treatment of another human being. It's also that it shows his sensitivity and his weakness with respect to the Rust Belt. This is not Rust Belt Joe. This is Hollywood Joe. This is gun control Joe. And he doesn't have much time for Rust Belt miners who believe in gun rights and believe in the Second Amendment. Another thing he said to Rust Belt folks is he said very cavalierly one time to coal miners, he said, oh, you guys can just learn how to code. If you can go down in a mine, you can learn how to be a computer programmer, which is complete and total nonsense. All the studies that have been done on
AK-47. Other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be.
Yeah, that's Biden's gun czar.
Yeah. So,
Beto.
Elizabeth Warren is going to be Secretary of the Treasury, and she's going to come for our money, and Beto is going to come for our guns. And that's the Biden administration in a nutshell. But it's this lingering reputation that he has for moderation and for understanding the ordinary concerns of middle America. It's completely bogus. He is as much of a coastal elite as you could possibly find, and his politics reflects that.
Well, I think he's the perfect representation of it. Not too bright, just parroting the whatever the conventional wisdom is, And the conventional wisdom, at least in Hollywood and DC, has gone so far left and radical. Biden just parrots it. And so, and he will have people in the administration who reflect that ideology, because it'll be the path of least resistance. And also because Kamala Harris will be probably running the show.
Right.
But it's not like Biden would be unhappy with that. Anything for power. And so, like, if that's why this, this is the guy who believed at one time in traditional marriage, was very staunch about it. Marriage is between a man and wife. And now this is a guy who's all about transgender rights, and we can't even say there's such thing as a man or a woman, because that would be bigoted. And that's one of the chapters of your book, which is transgender equality rights is the civil rights issue of the time. Whereas personally, I think that educating the poor and disadvantaged is a civil rights issue of our time. That, it's a travesty that we have all these uneducated young people, but not to Biden. It's the 0.0001% of people who are having problems with their gender identity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. His priorities are amazingly skewed, and he wants to turn public schools into social laboratories for transgenderism. He says on his education page on his campaign website that he wants to, make it as easy as possible for young kids to come out as transgender. And so that's, I would think parents across the country would fear a Department of Education under Joe Biden and all the edicts and mandates that it will impose on their children's schools. Biden is also, it doesn't get any attention, but Biden officiates at gay weddings, which would at one time have been considered a very outlandish action for a politician to perform, but Biden does it, and he doesn't seem to have the blatant inconsistency with his own faith doesn't seem to bother him very much, and he doesn't get rebuked for it by the bishops, and so I guess it's, in his mind, it's no big deal. But it just shows you how important all of these sort of marginal boutique left-wing issues are to him, while the really important meat and potatoes issues don't interest him at all. On education, he's going to be an absolute disaster. He's a champion of the destructive teachers unions. He's opposed to charter schools. He's opposed to vouchers. He's opposed to homeschooling. So pretty much every hopeful trend in education, Biden is opposed to. And so that's one of among many reasons for why people should vote against him, is that he's going to be one of the worst presidents we've ever had.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about this is that, like, one of the most offensive things that happened, in my opinion, during the Obama-Biden administration was when, I don't know if you recall this, but there were all these scholarshiped young children in Washington, D.C. area who were doing phenomenally well, scoring high and in these special charter schools. And Obama and Biden, they ended the program. Right. And so these poor families where their parents are trying to make a better life for the next generation, single mothers, almost every single one of them, just trying to do the right thing for their kids. And they're ending a program to help the poor.
Right.
It's just, and they have said, Biden has said that one of their plans, like Bill de Blasio, is to completely get rid of charter schools. Well, that will gut even further inner city school systems, and it will harm the middle class as well. They'll just move out. Like any middle class that's left will just leave cities, and it'll further strand poor Black families, mainly poor immigrant families, mainly in terrible, terrible school systems. It's an abomination, and nobody talks about it.
He wants to force as many poor kids as possible into these failed, horrific public schools. And, he's talked about how we can't take money away from these public schools. We have to just keep giving them more and more money. But
Right.
we've seen that there is absolutely no correlation between taxpayer money spent on public schools and achievement.
Well, Kim Classic, I don't know if you've seen her. She's running for, I think, a congressional seat in Baltimore, Maryland. And in her ads, and then I went and looked it up, there was not one boy in the entire Baltimore school system who was at grade level for math. Not one.
Right.
Not one child. It is. And so from you would think the Democrats would be talking about this, that they would find this shameful, that because this is in Democrat run cities, but it's the Republicans who are talking about it, trying to save these children, trying to make a better life for them. And Biden is right there at the front, coddling the teachers unions, promising them the world, and wrecking the educational opportunities for the next generation, and
Right.
furthering the divide. They talk about income inequality and everything. Well, why do you think that happens?
Right. If you go through his education plan, there's not a single mention of raising standards for teachers or for students. There's that, standards don't even come up in his plan. So and in fact, he wants to weaken standards for teachers. He wants to give them even more slack, so that, if they're doing a bad job, they still, can find a landing spot within the public school system. And I think that's, I think parents, I don't see how parents could vote for Joe Biden, given his not only his, advocacy for failed education, but also his advocacy for what amounts to a very sort of immoral and outre sort of programs for the young.
Yeah.
He's not, who would, do people really want their, 8-year-olds to be tutored on sex ed by Planned Parenthood, which is another one of his plans? He wants to bring
Right.
Planned Parenthood into elementary schools and have them oversee sex education for kids. I mean, is that what most parents want? I don't think so. There's a lot of, I think we're going to see parental rights wither under a Biden-Harris administration.
Well, and that's if they even go back to school. So Trump has said, and I kind of agree with him, that once the election is over, and the public health person in LA County, the morbid look, I forget her name, but she looks like a ghost. She looks like death warmed over. All these public health officials who look like they're on death's door. But anyway, she was talking about, after the election, it'll be okay for everybody to go back to school. And so the Democrats, even right now, are so willing to harm children that they're keeping them at home. And I read a study where they said that the amount of these kids are behind, they said that it will take them 13 years, a study that I can't remember where I read it, 13 years behind where they would be if they had stayed caught up with their education. It is going to take them 13 years longer to succeed in life, essentially, to get to the same spot because of what they lost now. And they can't get that back. And even in better school districts, I was told here, I was shocked. A teacher administrator talked to me, said that 25% of the kids just fell off into Never Never They just lost them when they went home. And so these kids are just nowhere. And the Democrats everywhere in the country, and Joe Biden is the speaker for that, all that policy, are not being educated. So, I mean, that's just another area where they're behind. Okay, let's talk about Green New Deal. Another way to, in my opinion, to burden the poor, because all of these companies that add these taxes and the carbon credits and everything makes energy costs and everything go up, and it's the poor who are affected once again.
Yeah, that's And then a inevitable consequence of the Green New Deal will be that prices will skyrocket.
Yeah.
Energy prices will go up, and supply will go down. You know what's happening in California, the blackouts in California.
Yeah.
That's a foreshadowing of the nation's future under Biden. He's going to, he wants to eliminate all of the most plentiful sources of energy. He wants to wipe out the fossil fuels industry. He doesn't want any fracking on public grounds, which is where most fracking takes place.
Right.
All of his climate change stuff is, the only effect it's going to have is it'll increase unemployment. It's not going to have any effect on the world's temperature. Studies have been done on this and show that these sorts of sacrifices are purely symbolic. They have no impact on temperature. So really, what's going to cause a crisis in our country is not the environment, but Joe Biden's environmentalism. It's environmentalism that causes the crisis. It's environmentalism that causes unemployment to go up, energy prices to go up, and government spending to go up.
Right. And then you have all these people who are, and it also shifts the environmental burden overseas. So like if companies have to have this much increased costs, what they do is they move their manufacturing overseas so they don't get punished with the carbon credit thing. And middle-class American jobs go to people in Indonesia and China, Vietnam, all that, India, and you basically gut our economy again. And the middle-class person is harmed. They have a harder time finding a good, solid job. They can't buy a house, and they're marginalized. I get the impression when you read your book and when you look at Biden's policies that this is part of the plan to shut the vast middle up. I just interviewed Michael Anton, and he said that there's no war of the elites using the rabble at the bottom as their like shock troops to squeeze the middle and to shut them up. And under Obama and Biden, their policies just killed the economy, slowed everything down, harmed the middle class, outsourced jobs, and then Trump comes in, people get their jobs again, self-respect, everything gets better. There's this sense of optimism. And Biden's policies seem to be a war against the American people, essentially.
Yeah, and for the Democrats, economic stagnation is not a problem, it's a solution. Yeah. They see that as a solution because if the economy is growing slowly, that means we're not using as much energy, which is their goal. They don't want us to use more energy. They want us to use less energy. So a slowing economy is in accordance with their ideology. And so that's why they can be so blasé about the tens of thousands of jobs that the Green New Deal will sacrifice, and they can they can be very pie in the sky-ish about eliminating fossil fuels because they don't really care if the economy slows down. That for them, that's not a problem. It's a solution.
So one of the things that Biden has said is that he's going to redo the Iran deal. He's going to re-enter the Paris Accords, which just hamstrung us and basically gave China a 10-year gimme.
Right.
All of these policies that Trump was like, forget it, this is not good for us. He's saying he's going to redo. First off, do you think that's even possible? And second off, what would that look like if he succeeded?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to go from America first policies to America last policies. Mm-hmm. Under a Biden-Harris administration, American sovereignty is going to be undermined by all of these international treaties that Biden is prepared to either rejoin or sign anew. And I think we're going to that issue of national sovereignty is going to come back into our politics because the left places so much of its trust in international institutions rather than in America herself. Mm-hmm. And they often, the Democrats see America not as the savior, but as the problem maker in the world. and they'll often, take sides against their own country. And, the Paris Climate Accord will, as you say, it's not going to benefit the United States. It's going to benefit all the countries that are going to disregard it and are going to continue to use coal. I think, the executive powers of Biden will all be used not to further American interests, but to further globalist interests.
It's so frustrating because I feel like after 4 years that there's been some real progress made, especially with reorienting the American mind toward being for the American. And now we have the kind of the riots and everything trying to undermine this kind of good feeling that people were really having. I have a job, things are going well. Real income was up like over $7,400 for every American. That's just huge. Like, and it helped the Trump economy helped the poorest people rise up the most with the tax changes and everything. And it's just kind of discouraging that it could even potentially happen that we'd end up with a Biden administration and undo all of those good things for the people who need it most. Anyway, it's just crazy to me that this guy who is such a radical could even be considered an alternative. Okay, so let's look at, you have a whole chapter about Creepy Joe. And this is another thing where I feel like I'm in a parallel universe. I'm like, how is it that when I see these videos, I am so completely grossed out? And feminists can defend him and say he's just affectionate. And I'm like, clearly these women are uncomfortable with him touching him, or these children. And there's been some smart politicians who haven't let Biden get close to their grandkids or their children or their wives. So can you talk a little bit about his weirdness in this area?
Yeah. He, ironically, he says, I'm going to bring presidential, dignity back to the White House. Never mind that as vice president, he was constantly undermining dignity. He famously whispered in Obama's ear, Obamacare is a big bleeping deal, on a hot mic. But then, with respect to women, he is a habitual harasser of women. There are, multiple accusations of misconduct by Biden, on different levels. A number of women, that Nevada legislator in particular, said that, he had put his hand on her back unexpectedly and whispered in her ear and sniffed her hair. And she felt that was just terribly inappropriate. And a number of women have made those charges against him. Secret Service agents complained about Biden because he'd go skinny dipping in the vice presidential pool naked, and they didn't want to be on his detail for that reason. But then we get to the really serious charge of Tara Reade. She said that she was flat out sexually assaulted by Biden, a charge which she has not withdrawn. And this is
all of a sudden the Me Too movement though just went poof. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even look, like if you look in the Me Too tag on Twitter, it's like it doesn't even exist anymore. And
right.
it reminds me exactly of what happened with Clinton. Was so awful, right? Just so awful. And I remember if I ever had any doubt about whether or not I wanted to be a Democrat, the whole Clinton affair, I was so soured by the feminists who oohed and awed over his virility. And it's like, he raped someone, and now we have Biden, who again seems to use his power to, knowing that these people are in positions where they can't do anything or say anything without it being really awkward. And he takes advantage of it. I mean, there's even a picture that came out of him sniffing Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, what is wrong with you?
Right.
He's a creepy guy, and people defend it. And I'm just like, this is way out of line, and especially if you look at it all together, it's just like, oh, yep, there it is. There he is, sniffing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's just like, how? It's like, is there anyone he hasn't sniffed?
Yeah. Even little children squirm at the sight of Biden because he's so handsy and makes them feel uncomfortable by pressing his face against theirs. But yeah, this goes to the issue of abortion. This really, like Ted Kennedy, like Bill Clinton, Joe Biden knows that he will receive absolution for these transgressions because of his support for abortion, and that's really that's the only way he can get away with this. If he was a Republican, the press would be all over him for this. But because he's a pro-abortion Democrat, he gets a pass.
Well, yeah. Speaking of abortion, and which I consider the leftist sacrament, and in direct violation of the Catholic sacraments, he's Catholic. He claims to be Catholic, and yet doesn't seem to hold any of the values of a Catholic. And this has been controversial. And since you are one of our Catholic writers, what do you make of all this?
Well, it's a blatant outrage that he can hold himself out as a Catholic while supporting abortion in every conceivable way and at every stage. And he's even now advocating for taxpayer funding of abortion. He flip-flopped famously on the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer funding of abortion. Biden now supports it. He's a supporter of embryonic stem cell research. He came out in favor of China's coercive population control measures. Remember, he went over to China and he said, "I fully understand China's one-child policy." So yeah, on issue after issue, he is the antithesis of what you'd expect from a Catholic politician, and yet he continues to hold himself out as one. And the grim irony is that he'll be the second. He could become the second Catholic president, but he will probably end up presiding over the most anti-Catholic presidency ever. He'll impose on the church not only a contraceptive mandate, but also an abortion mandate. And he'll make, he'll use the power of the federal government to coerce the religious into doing things which violate their conscience.
So, and we didn't even get into the whole China Hunter Biden fiasco, and we'll just have to save that for another time. But suffice it to say, Biden didn't start out rich in politics, but he certainly got rich in politics and was the beneficiary of all sorts of sweetheart deals, whether it be either Ukraine or China. He's utterly corrupt and will be China's best friend forever. They clearly want him to be elected. They've said so publicly, and the media has been amazingly incurious about that kind of influence on the president. And so we'll have to leave it there. If you could put your book up again so everybody can see it, the Biden Deception. I really encourage you guys to get it, to read it. I've been just your book kind of encapsulates everything, George, in one nice place for people to really have a good idea of this guy's history, because it's been long and very documented, and it's been amazing how the media has been able to obfuscate his history. And so this book is an answer to all of that. Get it out to all of your kind of on the fence friends who don't know which way to go,
right?
And read it and be educated. If, God forbid, Biden actually gets elected, this will be a nice handy book to know which direction he'll be going in every one of his policies.
Yeah.
So thank you. Is there anything that you would like to plug while you're here, George?
No, I think, you said it well, that I see this book as essential pre-election reading for those who are wavering. And if you have a wavering friend or family member, you could buy this book and give it to them, and they'll go into the polling box much more informed about Joe Biden's true record and not swayed by the mythology of the media.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it. Thank you for writing for the American Spectator. Everybody, if you have any questions, you can always reach us at editor@spectator.org, spectator.org. Find us on YouTube and Facebook. Like us, follow us, and give us your feedback. We really appreciate you listening. This is the Spectacle Podcast and our third episode in the bag. So happy to have you, George. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me, Melissa.